My friends, within you lives two versions of yourself. One is strong, determined, and destined for greatness. The other is weak, timid, and chained by excuses. If you truly desire success, you must wage war against that weaker version and refuse to let it dictate your destiny. Today, I will share with 12 key principles to help you rise above weakness and claim the power that belongs to you. Within each of us lives a constant battle between strength and weakness. The weaker version of ourselves hides behind excuses, fears, and doubts. It thrives on our hesitation and lack of clarity. The very first step in overcoming it is recognition. You cannot conquer an enemy you refuse to acknowledge. Take a hard look at your daily habits, the way you speak to yourself, and the excuses that slip into your mind. Name them, confront them, and expose them for what they are, chains designed to keep you from rising to your true potential. Once you recognize these weaknesses, you must take action. Excuses and hesitation are fuel for the weaker self, but action is its destroyer. Every time you choose to move forward, even when you do not feel ready, you starve the weaker version of power. Discipline becomes the weapon in your hands. By keeping promises to yourself and staying consistent, even in small matters, you build a foundation of strength that cannot be easily shaken. Discipline is what transforms ordinary efforts into extraordinary results. Fear is another tool of weakness. The timid self tells you to stay safe, to avoid discomfort, to wait for the perfect moment. But the truth is, fear loses all control the moment you face it. Stepping into what scares you is the only way to prove to yourself that you are stronger than any obstacle. Every act of courage weakens the timid version and strengthens the bold one. Alongside this, you must also be willing to sacrifice comfort. Comfort whispers to you that you have done enough, that you deserve to rest in mediocrity. But no one grows in the shade of comfort. Growth requires leaving the familiar and stepping into challenge. Your mind is the battlefield where this war is won or lost. Negative thoughts, comparisons, and doubts strengthen the weak self, but thoughts of power, purpose, and vision strengthen the greater self waiting to emerge. Surround yourself with those who uplift and challenge you, for environment shapes energy. Failure too must be redefined. To the weak self, failure is an ending, but to the strong self, it is a lesson, a teacher, and a stepping stone toward mastery. With every failure, you are not stepping backward, you are sharpening the tools of strength. The path to destroying the weaker version of yourself is sealed with commitment. Half-hearted efforts give it life, but full commitment suffocates it. Control your habits, speak with certainty, and carry an unwavering vision of who you are becoming. Declare with your words and prove with your actions that the weak version no longer rules you. From this moment forward, you must choose to rise, to act, to believe, and to fight for the stronger self within you. When you do, the timid self will fade, and in its place, an unstoppable, and powerful you will emerge. The weak version of yourself always finds shelter in excuses. It whispers subtle lies, convincing you that time is scarce, that conditions are not right, that somehow tomorrow will be better to begin. These excuses feel comfortable because they remove responsibility from your hands, but in truth, they are nothing more than illusions designed to keep you stagnant. Every time you say, "I can't," or "I'll wait," you strengthen the hold of weakness over your life. Excuses may sound reasonable in the moment, but they are silent thieves, robbing you of progress and opportunity. The reality is that no perfect moment exists, and waiting for it is another form of surrender. When you let hesitation rule, you remain in the same place, watching your potential slip further away. The weak self wants you to believe that conditions outside of you must change before you can act, but that is a trap. Conditions rarely align. It is action that creates alignment. Those who rise above mediocrity do not wait for the right time. They act, and in acting, they make the time right. Action is the antidote to weakness. It is the force that breaks excuses apart and leaves no room for them to grow. When you take a step forward, even a small one, the excuse that held you back loses its power. Action builds momentum, and momentum silences doubt. Each move you make sends a message to your weaker self: you no longer control me. And with every repetition of this cycle, strength becomes your new habit while excuses fade into irrelevance. Discipline is what ensures this process continues. Excuses tempt you to choose what is easy, but discipline guides you to choose what is necessary. Discipline requires you to act not when you feel like it, but when you must. Over time, the more disciplined actions you take, the weaker your excuses become. It is impossible for weakness to thrive in a life built on consistent effort and relentless commitment. Discipline creates a new identity, one where excuses are foreign and action is natural. The truth is simple: you cannot argue your way out of weakness. You can only act your way out of it. Every excuse accepted is an opportunity lost, but every excuse destroyed through action is a victory for your stronger self. Refuse to listen to the lies of delay and doubt. Replace them with decisive movement, no matter how uncomfortable or uncertain it feels. In that moment, you declare war on weakness, and with each act of courage, you bring the stronger, unstoppable version of yourself closer to life. Discipline is the great separator between those who live under the control of weakness and those who rise into strength. The weaker self seeks the path of least resistance, always looking for shortcuts or ways to escape responsibility. It convinces you that skipping one step, one habit, or one responsibility will not matter. But every neglected action builds a chain of weakness. Discipline, on the other hand, teaches you that every small action counts, that each choice is a brick in the foundation of the life you are building. When you hold to discipline, you slowly cut down the influence of the weaker self. Consistency is the essence of discipline. Greatness is not built in a day, but it is built daily. Small habits, when repeated, become powerful forces. Rising early, keeping promises, following through on commitments, all of these train your mind to obey your stronger self. The weaker self hates consistency because it thrives on chaos, distraction, and broken promises. But once you show yourself that you can follow through, confidence grows, and confidence is the shield that weakness cannot pierce. Discipline is not about punishment, it is about freedom. The person who lacks discipline is a slave to moods, impulses, and desires. But the one who practices discipline becomes free to choose his destiny. The weak self says, "Do what feels good now," while the strong self, guided by discipline, says, "Do what brings greatness later." Each time you choose discipline over indulgence, you trade temporary comfort for lasting strength. That is how the weaker version loses its grip. It is in the small things where the battle is won. The way you manage your mornings, the words you speak, the food you eat, the attention you give to your work, all of these seem minor, but together they shape the identity you live with. Weakness tells you that small things don't matter, but discipline knows they matter most. When you master the small disciplines, you are prepared for the larger challenges of life. Without this mastery, the weak self will always find an opening to creep back in. In the end, discipline is the sword you must never set down. With it, you cut through excuses, procrastination, and fear. Without it, the weaker self will always win, no matter how much you dream or plan. Discipline is the daily act of choosing strength over weakness, purpose over distraction, and growth over comfort. Each disciplined choice becomes a victory, and each victory builds the momentum that makes the stronger self permanent. When discipline becomes who you are, the weaker self has no place left to survive. Fear is the greatest ally of the weaker version of yourself. It hides in your mind, magnifying dangers that are not real and making challenges appear impossible. The weak self uses fear to keep you still, to stop you from taking the steps that could transform your life. Every time you allow fear to dictate your decisions, you hand over your power. You surrender not to reality, but to the illusion that weakness has created. Fear becomes the prison, and weakness is the jailer that locks the door. But the truth about fear is that it loses strength the moment you face it. What seems terrifying in your imagination often proves small when confronted directly. Action shrinks fear, while avoidance enlarges it. The strong self understands this, while the weaker self feeds on hesitation. Each time you step into the unknown, you prove to yourself that fear has no true power. It is not fear that is strong. It is your belief in it that makes it appear strong. Once you challenge it, you see it for what it really is, an empty shadow. Fear is also a teacher if you are willing to listen. It points toward the areas of your life where growth is waiting. What you fear most often holds the key to your greatest breakthroughs. The weak self interprets fear as a warning to retreat, but the strong self interprets fear as a signal to advance. By moving toward what scares you, you gather courage, and courage is the food that strengthens the best version of you. Every step you take into fear builds a record of victories that the weaker self cannot erase. There is no way to completely eliminate fear, but you can learn to master it. Mastery comes not by waiting until fear disappears, but by moving in spite of its presence. Fear may whisper in your ear, but courage is the voice you must obey. Weakness thrives when you avoid, when you delay, when you let your imagination create walls that do not exist. But once you act, the walls crumble, and you discover that fear was nothing more than a fragile barrier. When you decide to step into fear, you reclaim your life from the weaker self. Each time you act with courage, you strip weakness of its authority. The stronger you grow as you realize that fear is not your enemy, but the pathway to strength, confidence, and freedom. The weak self survives only when you let fear rule your choices. The strong self is born when you look fear in the eye and walk through it. That is the moment weakness begins to die and the stronger, unstoppable version of yourself takes control. Success always carries a price, and that price is sacrifice. Nothing of value is ever gained without giving something in return. The weaker self resists this truth, convincing you that you can achieve greatness while holding on to ease, convenience, and comfort. But the reality is that comfort is the enemy of progress. It may feel good in the moment, but it robs you of the struggle that forges strength. When you choose comfort over sacrifice, you are silently agreeing to remain the same. The weaker version of yourself loves comfort because it requires no effort. It persuades you to sleep a little longer, to avoid the hard work, to postpone the action until tomorrow. And though these choices seem small, they slowly build a life of regret. Comfort whispers that you are safe, but in truth it keeps you trapped. It shields you from growth, for growth is only found when you step beyond what is easy. Every time you cling to comfort, you close the door to becoming who you are meant to be. Sacrifice is the language of the strong self. It means giving up what is immediate for what is lasting. It means releasing distractions, toxic relationships, and unproductive habits so you can build a life of meaning and impact. Sacrifice feels difficult because it demands that you let go of what you have in order to reach for what you truly desire. But what you sacrifice in comfort, you gain tenfold in strength, confidence, and success. The weak self will never agree to this trade, but the strong self knows it is the only way forward. Those who achieve greatness are not those who avoided sacrifice, but those who embraced it. They gave up sleep to pursue their dreams, gave up leisure to build their skills, and gave up the approval of others to live according to vision. Sacrifice is not loss, it is an investment. Every sacrifice you make weakens the hold of the lesser self and strengthens the power of the greater one. You cannot become strong while holding on to what keeps you weak. The path to destiny always requires that you leave something behind. Comfort will beg you to stay, to rest, to be content with less than what you are capable of. But every time you refuse comfort and choose sacrifice, you are destroying the weaker version of yourself. The person you are meant to be lives on the other side of those choices. Success demands sacrifice, and sacrifice destroys weakness. If you can learn to love sacrifice, you will never again be ruled by the weaker self. You will rise into the fullness of your strength. Your mind is the battlefield where the war between weakness and strength is fought every single day. The weaker self is born in the shadows of your thoughts, feeding on doubt, negativity, and constant comparison. Left unguarded, your mind becomes a fertile ground for weakness to grow. Every time you allow self-defeating thoughts to settle in, you give the weaker self the ammunition it needs to control your actions. The truth is, nothing outside of you has the power to defeat you until you first surrender in your own mind. Guarding your mind requires vigilance. Just as a gatekeeper decides what enters the city, you must decide what thoughts are allowed to enter your inner world. Weakness thrives when you accept every thought without question, especially the ones that tell you are not enough, that you cannot win, or that someone else is always better. Strength begins when you filter those thoughts, reject the poison, and replace them with truth. What you dwell on shapes who you become, and what you allow into your mind either strengthens your future or weakens it. The weak self also feeds on comparison. Looking at others and measuring your worth against theirs is one of the most destructive habits you can entertain. It steals gratitude, kills progress, and blinds you to your own potential. Guarding your mind means refusing to fall into this trap. Your journey is unique, and your growth cannot be measured against anyone else's. The strong self knows that energy wasted on comparison is energy stolen from building a life of purpose. Replacing negative thoughts with affirmations of strength is not about blind optimism, it is about programming your mind for victory. Words have power, and the ones you repeat to yourself become the reality you live. The weak self says, I can't, won't, or I'll never. But the strong self declares, I will, I must, and I am capable. These declarations plant seeds of confidence and courage, and with repetition they grow into an unshakable belief system. Guarding your mind means choosing words that build, not words that destroy. When you take control of your mind, you take control of your life. Weakness has no chance against a mind filled with strength, belief, and vision. The stronger you emerges when your thoughts are aligned with your purpose and your words are aligned with your destiny. Guard your mind with relentless discipline, and the weaker version of yourself will wither away. It cannot survive in a mind that is trained to see possibilities instead of problems, growth instead of limitation, and victory instead of defeat. The people you allow into your life shape the energy you carry and the standards you live by. The weaker version of yourself grows strong when you keep company with those who complain, gossip, or settle for less than their potential. Their attitudes seep into your mind, and before you realize it, their habits become your habits. Weakness is contagious when you surround yourself with those who choose the easy way, and it slowly pulls you into the same cycle of mediocrity. If you want to destroy the weaker version of yourself, you must seek out strength in others. Surround yourself with people who refuse to make excuses, who challenge themselves daily, and who expect excellence not only from themselves, but also from those around them. Their discipline becomes a mirror, showing you what is possible, and their drive inspires you to raise your own standards. The energy of strength multiplies when shared, and being in such an environment forces your weaker self into retreat. Environment is more powerful than willpower. You may have the strongest intentions, but if you spend your time with those who live in weakness, you will eventually adopt their ways. On the other hand, when you step into a circle of strength, your habits begin to change almost naturally. Conversations shift from problems to solutions, from gossip to growth, from excuses to actions. The stronger self thrives in this environment because it is constantly fed with encouragement, vision, and accountability. Sometimes destroying the weaker self requires difficult decisions about relationships. You may need to distance yourself from those who pull you down, even if they are familiar or comfortable. It is not about arrogance, it is about survival. The weak self will always seek the company of those who make it feel safe, but if you want to rise, you cannot allow loyalty to weakness to outweigh loyalty to your future. Choosing the right people is choosing the stronger version of you. When you build your circle wisely, you create an atmosphere where weakness cannot breathe. You find yourself surrounded by voices that push you higher, by examples that demand you grow, and by accountability that refuses to let you settle. The stronger self is fueled by such company, while the weaker self starves. In the end, who you walk with determines who you become. Walk with strength, and strength will destroy the weaker version of you. Failure is the turning point where the weak self and the strong self separate. The weak self looks at failure and immediately surrenders, using it as evidence that dreams are impossible and effort is useless. It whispers that failure means you are not capable, not worthy, not enough. This interpretation feeds weakness, keeping you stuck in a cycle of self-doubt and regret. But failure itself is neutral. It is neither your enemy nor your defeat. It is only your response to it that determines whether weakness grows or strength emerges. The stronger self looks at failure through a different lens. It sees failure as feedback, as a lesson written in the language of experience. Every misstep, every setback, every disappointment carries information about what must be improved, adjusted, or strengthened. Where the weak self sees the end, the strong self sees a new beginning. With each failure, you gather wisdom that cannot be gained from success alone. Failure becomes a teacher, not a judge. When you choose to use failure as a weapon, you take away its power to wound you and instead use it to sharpen your determination. Each setback becomes fuel for the fire inside you. The weak self says, "Stop, it is too hard." But the strong self replies, "Good, this challenge is making me tougher." In this way, failure forges resilience, a quality the weak self cannot survive. The more you endure and rise from failure, the stronger your character becomes. Avoiding failure only strengthens the weaker version of yourself because it keeps you trapped in hesitation and fear. The strong self understands that failure is inevitable on the path to growth. No invention, no success story, no transformation has ever been achieved without countless failures along the way. By stepping into challenges and accepting the possibility of failure, you break the hold of weakness. You prove that you are willing to risk discomfort in order to rise higher. Ultimately, failure is not the opposite of success, it is part of success. Every failure carries within it the seeds of wisdom, persistence, and mastery. If you allow weakness to define failure as defeat, you will never move forward. But if you choose to see failure as a stepping stone, each one brings you closer to the life you were meant to live. The weak self dies when you refuse to bow to failure, and the strong self is born when you use it as a weapon to build unshakable strength. Without vision, life drifts without direction, and in that drift, the weaker self always takes control. The weaker version of you thrives in confusion, in uncertainty, in the absence of purpose. When you do not know who you want to become, every distraction seems tempting and every delay feels justified. Vision is the compass that keeps you on course, the force that makes weakness intolerable. Without it, you are like a ship without a rudder, carried wherever the winds of circumstance choose to take you. A clear vision is more than a dream. It is a vivid picture of the future you are determined to create. It is the stronger self speaking loudly, declaring, "This is who I am meant to be." When you hold this vision, the excuses of the weak self lose their power because you see beyond the moment. Vision gives meaning to discipline, to sacrifice, and even to failure because you understand that each step, no matter how difficult, is part of building that future. The weak self only sees the discomfort of today, but vision keeps your eyes fixed on the reward of tomorrow. Vision demands clarity. It is not enough to vaguely want a better life. You must know exactly what kind of person you want to become and what kind of impact you want to make. The weak self settles for general desires, saying, "I just want to be happy," or "I just want to be successful." But the strong self defines happiness, defines success, and builds a clear image of it in the mind. When the picture is sharp, action becomes simple, and weakness cannot survive in the face of such certainty. Once vision is established, it becomes the standard by which you measure your actions. Every choice is filtered through the question, does this bring me closer to the person I want to be, or does it strengthen the weaker self? This clarity creates discipline without forcing it. You no longer need to rely on temporary motivation because vision pulls you forward. Weakness thrives when choices are made without purpose, but vision transforms every decision into a step toward destiny. Vision also fuels resilience. When setbacks and failures appear, the weak self sees them as reasons to quit. But when your vision is strong, you view them only as temporary obstacles on a much larger path. Vision reminds you why you started, why the sacrifice is worth it, and why you cannot give up. It is the anchor that holds you steady when the storm of life threatens to pull you off course. Weakness cannot coexist with resilience, and resilience is born from a vision so strong that no difficulty can break it. In the end, vision is not just about seeing the future, it is about creating it. It is the blueprint that destroys weakness because it gives you a reason too powerful to ignore. With vision, discipline becomes natural, fear loses its grip, sacrifice feels purposeful, and failure becomes progress. Without vision, the weak self will always whisper louder. With vision, the strong self stands tall, unshakable, and clear in direction. To destroy the weak version of yourself, you must first create a vision so compelling that anything less becomes unacceptable. Your habits are the silent architects of your life. Each action you repeat, whether big or small, builds a pattern that shapes who you become. The weaker self survives through careless, destructive habits, sleeping too long, wasting time, feeding on distraction, or indulging in comfort. These habits seem harmless in isolation, but together they create a life of limitation. The stronger self, however, is built on habits that align with discipline, vision, and growth. Every choice you make either feeds weakness or strengthens power. The truth about habits is that they work quietly without drawing attention to themselves. You may not notice their effect immediately, but over time they determine everything: your health, your mindset, your relationships, and your success. Weakness thrives on habits that waste your energy and rob you of focus, while strength thrives on habits that sharpen your mind and build consistency. The person you will become tomorrow is already being decided by the habits you practice today. Taking control of your habits requires honesty and responsibility. You must be willing to examine your daily routine and ask, does this habit bring me closer to the life I want, or does it pull me back into weakness? That question exposes the truth. The weak self will resist this kind of reflection, preferring comfort over change, but the strong self demands it. By replacing destructive habits with empowering ones, you strip weakness of its daily fuel and starve it into submission. Habits also carry momentum. Once you repeat them long enough, they begin to operate automatically. This is why the weaker self fights to keep its old patterns alive. Because once those patterns are ingrained, they require little effort to continue. The key is to break that cycle by deliberately creating new, empowering routines. At first, they may feel unnatural or difficult, but with repetition, they become effortless, and once they take root, the weaker self finds no ground to stand on. In the end, habits are choices made visible over time. You cannot claim to be building the stronger version of yourself while feeding habits that strengthen weakness. Every habit is a vote for who you are becoming. If you choose wisely and consistently, your daily actions will destroy the weaker version of yourself without struggle, because weakness cannot survive in a life ruled by powerful habits. The stronger you is built not by chance, but by the habits you practice every day. The words you speak shape the reality you live in, and the weaker self knows this well. That is why it thrives when you use language filled with doubt and hesitation. Every time you say, "I can't," "I'll try," or maybe one day you are feeding weakness with permission to stay alive. These phrases may seem harmless, but they plant seeds of uncertainty in your mind. Over time, they grow into beliefs that chain you to mediocrity, convincing you that strength and success are beyond your reach. The stronger self speaks with power because it understands that words are declarations of intent. When you say, I will, I must, or I am, you are programming your mind to act with certainty. The words may not match your current circumstances, but they align with your vision and guide your actions. Language is not just communication, it is construction. You are building your identity with every word you speak, and if you want to destroy the weaker self, you must stop building its house with weak words. The weak self often hides behind soft language because it fears commitment. Saying, I'll try feels safe because it leaves room to retreat if things get hard. But that safety is an illusion because hesitation always leads to failure. The strong self knows that certainty creates pressure, and pressure creates growth. When you speak with determination, you close the door to retreat and force yourself to move forward. Certainty in your words is the beginning of certainty in your actions. Speaking with power is not arrogance, it is alignment. It means choosing words that match the person you are becoming, not the person you are leaving behind. Weakness wants you to keep identifying with limitations, but strength requires you to identify with possibilities. Each time you declare, I am disciplined, I am strong, I am capable, you are reminding yourself of who you are committed to becoming. Over time, these declarations carve new pathways in your mind, making strength your natural language and weakness a foreign tongue. In the end, your words are commands to yourself and signals to the world around you. Speak weakness, and you will live weakness. Speak strength, and you will live strength. The weak self cannot survive when your language is filled with power, certainty, and determination. It crumbles under weight of bold declarations, while the strong self rises with every powerful word you choose. Speak as if your future depends on it, because it does. Half-hearted effort is the breeding ground of weakness. When you give only a portion of yourself, you leave room for excuses, hesitation, and doubt to grow. The weaker self thrives in this middle ground where you are neither fully in nor fully out. It whispers, you can always quit later, and because you never fully commit, you never truly begin. This indecision creates a cycle where progress is minimal, energy is wasted, and weakness is reinforced day after day. Full commitment, however, is the declaration of war against the weaker self. When you commit with all of your heart, you eliminate the option of retreat. There is no if it works or I'll see how it goes. There is only I will until it is done. This mindset leaves no space for weakness to survive. The moment you close every back door and remove every excuse, the weaker self begins to suffocate because its power depends on your hesitation. Commitment is not simply about starting strong, it is about staying the course when the initial excitement fades. The weak self grows loud when obstacles appear, urging you to turn back or settle for less, but full commitment demands that you push forward even when motivation is gone. It demands persistence when results are slow, and endurance when the path is painful. Each act of persistence is another nail in the coffin of weakness, proving that it no longer rules you. The beauty of full commitment is that it multiplies your strength. When you are all in, your mind becomes sharper, your actions more decisive, and your resilience unshakable. The weak self feeds on doubt, but doubt cannot exist in a fully committed heart. By deciding with finality that you will not quit, you unlock levels of energy and creativity that half-hearted effort will never access. Commitment transforms your potential into reality because it removes every barrier of hesitation. In the end, commitment is the fire that burns the weaker self to ashes. It is the line in the sand where you decide that nothing will stop you, that no excuse will stand, and that no setback will define you. Weakness cannot live in the presence of relentless determination. The stronger you is born the moment you commit fully, without hesitation, without retreat, and without compromise. With full commitment, you destroy the weak version of yourself and step into the life of strength, clarity, and greatness that was always meant to be yours. My friends, greatness is not something outside of you. It is already within you. But to unleash it, you must face the war within. Destroy the weak version of yourself, and in its place, the strong, unstoppable, unshakable you will rise.